In the summer of 1943, a strange silence settled over the Eastern Front. After years of constant movement and destruction, the battlefield around Kursk fell quiet. But this silence was an illusion. Beneath the open fields and small villages of central Russia, the largest concentration of military power the world had ever known was preparing to collide. More than 6,000 tanks, 2 million soldiers, and thousands of aircraft were gathering for a single decisive confrontation. This would not be just another battle. For Nazi Germany, it was the last chance to regain control of the war in the East. German commanders believed one massive blow could shatter the Red Army and restore German dominance. The Soviet leadership knew this attack was coming, and instead of striking first, they decided to wait. What followed would become the largest tank battle in history and one of the most decisive moments of World War II. After the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, Germany's strategic position had changed forever. The myth of an invincible Wehrmacht was shattered, but Adolf Hitler refused to accept defeat. Despite losses in men, tanks, and experienced officers, he believed the war could still be won, with a carefully planned offensive. By the spring of 1943, the Eastern Front had formed a massive bulge around the city of Kursk. Soviet forces pushed westward here, creating a vulnerable-looking protrusion deep into German lines. To Hitler, this bulge was an opportunity. If German armies could strike from the north and south, they could encircle and destroy a large portion of the Red Army in a single blow. This operation was given the name Operation Citadel. German generals planned a classic pincer movement. From the north, forces led by Field Marshal Günther von Kluge would attack through fortified Soviet positions. From the south, General Erich von Manstein's units, equipped with Germany's newest tanks, would drive forward to meet them. Once joined, the encirclement would annihilate Soviet forces inside the pocket. On paper, the plan looked decisive. In reality, it was already doomed. What the German High Command failed to realize was that the Soviet Union knew almost everything. Through intelligence networks, intercepted communications, and careful observation, Soviet planners had exact information about German intentions, attack routes, and even approximate dates of the assault. Instead of launching a counteroffensive, the Red Army did something unexpected. It dug in. Over the course of several months, Soviet forces transformed the Kursk region into one of the most heavily fortified zones in military history. Thousands of kilometers of trenches were carved into the earth. Minefields were laid in layers, sometimes 5 or 6 belts deep. Anti-tank guns were carefully hidden, artillery positions disguised, and reserves placed far behind the front lines, waiting for the right moment. Entire fields were turned into death traps. This was not defensive weakness. It was deliberate strategy. For the first time in the war, the Red Army planned to absorb the German attack, wear it down, and then counterattack once the enemy's strength was exhausted. Every village, hill, and road was measured not in kilometers, but in how many tanks and soldiers it could destroy. Meanwhile, the Germans delayed the operation again and again. Hitler insisted on waiting for new weapons to arrive: the Panther tank, the Tiger heavy tank, and specialized tank destroyers designed to overpower Soviet armor. This delay would prove fatal. With every passing week, Soviet defenses grew stronger. When the German attack finally began in July 1943, it did not strike an unprepared enemy. It struck an army that had turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. What followed was a grinding, brutal clash of steel and fire, a battle defined not by speed or surprise, but by endurance and overwhelming force. And this was only the beginning. The scale of the preparations on both sides was unprecedented. The Red Army did not rely on a single defensive line. Instead, Soviet engineers built multiple layers of defenses, stretching dozens of kilometers deep. Infantry units were trained to fight alongside anti-tank crews, while artillery was pre-registered on likely German approach routes. Every possible path of advance was studied and covered by fire. Soviet commanders understood that German armor remained dangerous. Tiger and Panther tanks were technologically superior on paper, but they were few in number and mechanically unreliable. The Soviet response was simple and brutal: overwhelm quality with quantity and channel German armor into killing zones where it could be destroyed piece by piece. Behind the front lines, entire tank armies waited in concealment. These formations were not meant to defend. They were designed to strike back with overwhelming force once the German spearheads had lost momentum. For the first time, Soviet operational planning matched, and, in some ways surpassed, the sophistication of the German general staff. On the German side, confidence remained dangerously high. Many officers believed the Red Army could not sustain a prolonged armored engagement. They underestimated both Soviet industrial output and the lessons learned from previous defeats. While Germany struggled to replace losses, Soviet factories east of the Urals were producing tanks and artillery at an astonishing rate. Timing was also working against the Germans. The delay of Operation Citadel gave the Red Army exactly what it needed: time. Time to dig deeper, reinforce positions, build reserves, and prepare counteroffensives that would not simply repel the attack, but destroy the attacking force. By early July, the battlefield was ready. Tens of thousands of guns stood silent. Minefields waited beneath tall grass. Tank crews slept beside their machines, knowing that once the fighting began, few would rest again. The coming battle would not be decided in hours or days. It would be a test of endurance, firepower, and industrial strength, a battle where momentum itself would become a weapon. When the first German units finally advanced toward the Kursk salient, they moved into a carefully prepared storm. And once it began, there would be no turning back. When the German assault finally began in early July 1943, it did not unfold as planned. Instead of a rapid breakthrough, German armored formations moved slowly, grinding forward under constant fire. Minefields tore tracks from tanks, forcing engineers to clear paths under artillery bombardment. Every kilometer cost time and lives. In the north of the Kursk salient, German forces ran into an unexpected wall of resistance. Soviet defensive lines held firm, supported by massive artillery concentrations. Even elite German units found themselves stalled, advancing only a few kilometers after days of fighting. The momentum Germany relied upon was slipping away. In the south, the situation appeared more promising for the Germans. Here, Manstein's forces achieved deeper penetrations, spearheaded by heavy armor units and elite divisions. German tanks pushed forward through dense defensive belts, crushing trenches and silencing gun positions. For a brief moment, it seemed the offensive might still succeed, but each advance triggered a calculated Soviet response. Rather than committing reserves immediately, Soviet commanders waited. German spearheads were allowed to move forward, deeper into increasingly dense resistance. Supply lines stretched thin, mechanical failures mounted. Panthers broke down almost as frequently as they engaged the enemy, and Tigers, while powerful, became priority targets for coordinated Soviet fire. Then came Prokhorovka. On open terrain near a small railway station, hundreds of tanks from both sides collided at close range. Visibility was poor, dust and smoke hanging thick in the air. Engagement distances collapsed to mere meters. Crews fired at point-blank range, ramming enemy vehicles when guns failed. This was not a battle of maneuver. It was pure chaos. Soviet T-34s charged directly into German formations, sacrificing range and armor protection to close the distance and negate technical disadvantages. German gunners struggled to distinguish friend from foe amid the noise and confusion. Tanks burned, ammunition exploded, and crews fought inside steel coffins that could become death traps in an instant. Losses were staggering. The ground became littered with wreckage, twisted metal scattered across fields once meant for farming. While Prokhorovka has often been remembered as a single decisive moment, the reality was far more complex. Across the entire Kursk front, German forces were being worn down simultaneously. Every advance came at a cost Germany could no longer afford. Then the balance shifted. As German momentum slowed, the Red Army unleashed its counteroffensives. Fresh Soviet units, held in reserve for weeks, surged forward. Entire tank armies moved into action, launching powerful strikes against exhausted German formations. What had begun as a German attack rapidly turned into a defensive struggle. German commanders requested permission to press on, believing victory was still possible if they could just break through. Hitler hesitated, and then made a decision that sealed Germany's fate. Faced with Allied landings in Italy and mounting crises elsewhere, He ordered the offensive halted. Operation Citadel was over. For the first time, Germany had launched a major strategic offensive and failed completely. The battlefield of Kursk had absorbed the full force of the Wehrmacht and survived. The initiative now belonged to the Red Army. When the guns finally fell silent around Kursk, the battlefield told a grim story. Vast stretches of land were covered with the wreckage of destroyed tanks, artillery pieces, and burned-out vehicles. Tens of thousands of soldiers had been killed or wounded in a matter of weeks. Yet despite the enormous losses on both sides, one truth stood above all others. Germany had lost the strategic initiative forever. Unlike earlier defeats, Kursk could not be explained away as a temporary setback. This was not an encirclement caused by overconfidence, nor a surprise attack launched under poor conditions. It was a carefully prepared German offensive, equipped with the best weapons available and led by experienced commanders. And it had failed. The reasons were fundamental. Germany no longer possessed the industrial capacity to replace its losses. Each destroyed tank represented months of production that could not be matched. Each lost crew was a veteran impossible to replace. The Red Army, by contrast, had reached a level of industrial and organizational strength that allowed it to absorb losses and continue advancing. Equally important was the shift in operational doctrine. After Kursk, the Red Army no longer fought defensively out of necessity. It now dictated the pace of the war. Soviet commanders launched massive, coordinated offensives that stretched German defenses along hundreds of kilometers. The Wehrmacht, forced onto the defensive, could no longer choose where or when to fight. German morale suffered deeply. The belief in technical superiority and tactical brilliance had been shattered. Soldiers who once expected rapid victories now faced relentless pressure, dwindling supplies, and a constantly retreating front. The Eastern Front became a war of survival rather than conquest. Within weeks of Kursk, Soviet forces launched major offensives that liberated vast territories previously occupied by German troops. City after city fell as German forces withdrew westward, unable to stabilize the front. The Red Army pushed toward the Dnieper River, opening the road that would eventually lead to Berlin itself. Politically and strategically, Kursk sent a powerful signal to the world. Any remaining hope that Germany could win the war in the East vanished. Allies and adversaries alike understood that the balance of power had shifted decisively. From this point onward, the outcome was no longer in doubt, only the cost. The Battle of Kursk marked the end of Germany's ability to conduct large-scale offensive operations on the Eastern Front. From that summer forward, every major engagement would be initiated by the Red Army. The Wehrmacht would never again dictate the course of the war in the East. In the ruins of burned fields and shattered metal, the future of the conflict was written. Kursk was not just the largest tank battle in history. It was the moment when the path to Germany's defeat became irreversible. And as the Red Army advanced westward, the echoes of that battle followed, all the way to the heart of the Third Reich. Beyond the military consequences, the Battle of Kursk reshaped the psychological balance of the war. For German soldiers, the realization slowly set in that victory was no longer achievable through bold offensives or superior tactics. The war had become a defensive struggle against an enemy that now possessed numerical, industrial, and strategic superiority. For the Soviet Union, Kursk confirmed a hard-earned transformation. The Red Army that had suffered catastrophic defeats in 1941 no longer existed. In its place stood a force capable of planning complex operations, coordinating massive formations, and sustaining prolonged offensives. Commanders who had learned through failure now executed with confidence and precision. The industries of the Soviet Union continued to expand production at an extraordinary pace. Factories deep in the east turned out tanks, artillery, and aircraft in numbers Germany could not hope to match. Each new Soviet offensive drew strength from this relentless stream of resources, while Germany's reserves dwindled with every retreat. Strategically, Kursk also freed the Allies from uncertainty. Any lingering doubts in London or Washington about the outcome of the war on the Eastern Front disappeared. The Soviet advance after Kursk forced Germany to divert forces continuously, weakening its ability to resist Allied pressure in the West. The collapse of German power became a matter of when, not if. By late 1943 and into 1944, the Red Army pressed forward across Eastern Europe, reclaiming territory and pushing German forces ever closer to their own borders. The line drawn at Kursk expanded westward, marking a relentless advance that would not stop until Berlin fell. In retrospect, the Battle of Kursk stands as more than a clash of machines and armies. It was the final proof that industrial capacity, strategic foresight, and endurance would decide the modern war. Numbers alone did not win the battle, but preparation, adaptation, and the ability to learn from defeat had turned the tide. Kursk ended the age of German dominance on the Eastern Front. From that moment forward, the path of the war led in only one direction: toward defeat for Nazi Germany, and toward the end of the Second World War in Europe.